Human evolution economic system. James, start.
Good evening. I'm delighted to welcome you all to Telangana Jana Vedika's 387th session this evening. Our topic today is Anthropocene and the politics of our times. An introduction. The 4.5 billion years of Earth's geological history is divided into specific eras, and scientists tell us that we are now in the Anthropocene. It can be defined as the era where the humans as a species have made the most impact on the planet and its environment. While some scientists debate whether the Anthropocene started towards the end of the glacial age, 12,000 years ago, when human beings started settling down into societies and started agriculture, and some say the era started with the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Nevertheless, the fact remains that we as a society are diving headlong into a climate catastrophe, a crisis perpetuated by us. Climate scientists from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Global Monitoring Laboratory say we are adding roughly 40 billion metric tons of CO2 pollution to the atmosphere per year. CO2 is generated by carbon-based fossil fuels used in transport, deforestation, agriculture, factories, etc. Along with other greenhouse gases, CO2 traps infrared radiation on the planet's surface that would otherwise escape into space. An obsession for growth and increased efficiency in all aspects of life has become the dominant ideology of societies in the modern era. In the Renaissance and Enlightenment periods, science and rational thinking became the norm, which led to embrace of technological progress and urbanization. We now believe that the environment is at our service, and we are trying to control it through scientific means. The response to this was normative visions regarding green politics have emerged as a significant political force since mid-1970s, and it has a position which is explicitly global in character and addressing global politics in a distinct fashion and visions concerning restructuring of world politics. While the key strands of this thought are ecocentric ethics, limits to growth, decentralization of power, also global ecology and environmentalism are important distinctions. Anthropocene is marked by a vision of technological development and finding answers through science, which would help develop a better human society with equal opportunities for all. However, human beings are more complex psychologically, and for the society to develop as a whole, it needs a developmental plan. But as we progress and the plans are inadequate, the question is about human development versus ecological development. We need to talk about ecological development. Environment can no longer be viewed from just human perspective and bound in human laws. One has to understand every element of the environment to make laws and regulations and design the plan for development. Here, I'm sure that Ms. Aparna Vijayan will give us a clear outline of the politics surrounding the Anthropocene era and its outcomes and help us understand this very defining topic. Ms. Aparna Vijayan is a research scholar in the Department of Political Science, the Maharaja Sayaji Rao University of Vadodara. She has done a lot of studies and research in the field of Anthropocene. And I'm very happy that she has studied under the able tutelage of Professor Lajvanti Chatani, and we are grateful to the professor for introducing Ms. Vijayan to us. Now, I would like to hand over to Professor Akutota Srinivas Garu to moderate the session. Thank you. Professor Srinivas.
Thank you, James. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, thank you.
Telangana Jana Vedika Zoom online meeting ku విచ్చేసినటువంటి అందరికీ కూడా సాయంకాల నమస్కారాలు. అందరికీ స్వాగతం, సుస్వాగతం. ఇవాటి అంశం భౌగోళిక యుగంలో సమకాలీన రాజకీయాలు ఒక పరిశీలన అనేటువంటి అంశం మీద అపర్ణ విజయన్ వారు రీసెర్చ్ స్కాలర్, డిపార్ట్మెంట్ ఆఫ్ పొలిటికల్ సైన్స్, మహారాజా సాయాజీ రావ్ యూనివర్సిటీ, వడోదరా, గుజరాత్. ఈ అంశం మీద భౌగోళిక యుగము అంటేనే భూమి పుట్టుక అనేటువంటిది నేను అనుకుంటున్నాను. సరే, భౌగోళిక యుగం లోపల రాజకీయ ప్రస్థానం ఎలా మొదలైంది అంటే, అసలు ముందుగా మానవుల యొక్క పుట్టుక గురించి మనం తెలుసుకోవాలి. మనిషి పుట్టిన దగ్గర నుండి నాగరికత నేర్చుకోక ముందు నుండి కూడా ఆహారం కోసం అడవుల్లో వేటాడడం అనేటువంటిది ప్రధానంగా మొదటిగా అయినటువంటి విషయంగా మనం పరిగణిస్తే, ఆ తర్వాత ఆహారం కోసం వేటాడిన తర్వాత వాటిని పోగు చేసుకోవడం, ఒక కుటుంబంగా ఏర్పడడం, ఆ తర్వాత కొంతమంది వ్యవస్థగా ఏర్పడడం, ఆ తర్వాతగా రాజకీయాలు రావడం, అదేవిధంగా ప్రధానంగా బానిసలుగా చేసుకునేటువంటి వ్యవస్థ. ఆనాటి కాలంలో బానిస వ్యవస్థ, స్లెవరీ అనేటువంటిది ఉండేది. అక్కడ నుండి మొదలై, అంటే బానిస వ్యవస్థ దగ్గర నుండి మొదలుకొని పెట్టుబడిదారి సమాజం 17-18 శతాబ్దంలో అంత ముందు ఉండేటువంటి సమాజాల లోపల ఈ యొక్క పారిశ్రామిక విప్లవం తర్వాత ముఖ్యంగా పెట్టుబడిదారి దేశాలు లేదా క్యాపిటలిస్టిక్ సొసైటీ ఏర్పడడం, ఆ తర్వాత సోషలిస్టిక్ సొసైటీస్, కమ్యూనిస్టు సొసైటీలుగా ఏర్పడడం ప్రపంచ స్థాయిలో అనేక రాజకీయ పరిణామాలు చోటు చేసుకున్నటువంటి కారణం. ఆ తర్వాత ముఖ్యంగా 1991 తర్వాత ప్రపంచంలో అనేకమైనటువంటి రాజకీయాల్లో మార్పులు రావడం అనేటువంటి జరిగింది. ప్రధానంగా క్యాపిటలిస్టిక్ సొసైటీ, ఎల్పిజి, లిబరలైజేషన్, ప్రైవేటైజేషన్, గ్లోబలైజేషన్ తర్వాత ప్రపంచంలో అనేకమైనటువంటి దేశాల లోపల రాజకీయాల్లో పెను మార్పులు అనేటువంటివి సంపాదించాయి. ముఖ్యంగా ప్రధానంగా ప్రజాస్వామ్య దేశాల లోపల ముఖ్యంగా పెట్టుబడిదారి వ్యవస్థ అనేటువంటిది పెద్ద ఎత్తున పెరిగిపోతున్నటువంటి క్రమం లోపల వెల్ఫేర్ స్టేట్ గా గుర్తించినటువంటి దేశాలన్నీ కూడా ఇవాళ ఓటు బ్యాంకు రాజకీయాలు ముడిపడి ఇవాళ అన్ని కూడా ఉచితానికి ప్రవేశపెట్టడం అనేటువంటిది రాజకీయాల్లో ఒక అంతర్భాగంగా తయారై ఓటు హక్కునే ప్రధానంగా లేదా ఓటునే ప్రథమావధిగా చేసుకొని ఇవాళ రాజకీయాలు కొనసాగుతున్నాయి. అంతే తప్ప ప్రజలకు సేవ చేయడం అనేటువంటిది కాదు అనేటువంటిది ప్రధానమైనటువంటి ఉద్దేశం. కాబట్టి క్యాపిటలిస్టిక్ సొసైటీలో ఇవాళ ప్రపంచంలో అన్ని దేశాలలో కొనసాగుతున్నాయని చెప్పడంలో ఏమాత్రం సందేహం లేదు. కాబట్టి ఇవాళ ప్రపంచం మొత్తం కూడా పెట్టుబడిదారికి సంబంధించినటువంటి రాజకీయాలే నడుస్తున్నాయి తప్ప, కార్పొరేట్ రాజకీయాలే నడుస్తున్నాయి తప్ప, ఇక్కడ సోషలిస్టిక్ సొసైటీస్ కానీ కమ్యూనిస్టిక్ సొసైటీస్ కానీ మనకు కనబడడం లేదు. పైకి మాత్రమే అవి సోషలిజంగా, కమ్యూనిజంగా మనకు కనబడుతున్నాయి కానీ ఓవరాల్ గా చూస్తే క్యాపిటలిజమే కనబడుతుంది. ఇదంతా కూడా దోపిడీకే సంబంధించినటువంటి వ్యవస్థలుగా కనపడుతున్నాయి. రాజకీయాలు కూడా క్యాపిటలిస్టిక్ దృష్టితోనే మొత్తం కూడా వాటి పెట్టుబడిదారు సమాజం చుట్టే తిరుగుతున్నాయి కాబట్టి వాళ్ళ సమకాలీన సమాజం లోపల పెట్టుబడిదారి రాజకీయాలే నడుస్తున్నాయని చెప్పేసి నేను భావిస్తూ భౌగోళిక యుగంలో సమకాలీన రాజకీయాలు విశ్లేషణ అనేటువంటి అంశం పైన అపర్ణ విజయన్ డిపార్ట్మెంట్ ఆఫ్ పొలిటికల్ సైన్స్ మహారాజా సాయాజీరావు యూనివర్సిటీ వడోదర వారిని మాట్లాడవలసిందిగా వారిని సాధారణంగా ఆహ్వానిస్తున్నాం. ఐ ఇన్వైట్ అపర్ణ విజయన్ రీసెర్చ్ స్కాలర్ వారిని మాట్లాడవలసిందిగా ఆహ్వానిస్తాం.
Aparna, you can take over now.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. James. Thank you so much, Srinivasalu sir, for the kind introduction. Unlike what Dr. James said, I have not done an extensive research in Anthropocene, but I just began reading about it thanks to an international conference that was organized in our department, organized by Professor Lajwanti Chatani. This was the conference was initiated by Professor Upendra Bakshi on Anthropocene and the future of dissent, in fact, and on ecological authoritarianism. And that was the first time I personally got associated with this term or got introduced to this term. And that's when I realized that we never sort of dealt with this in our social studies at all, in social sciences all these years. Probably we might have at some point, but not as a major area of focus. So that's how I got, and I may say, if I may say, it's just maybe an year old. I'm just an year old as far as this field is concerned. Not again very consistent, but I'll try my best to bring about what I think of as I understand from the perspective of a political scientist. How do I understand or perceive Anthropocene as an important discourse necessary for any social sciences, for anyone who is dealing with social studies or social sciences, especially knowledge systems. So I'll definitely be talking about how knowledge systems must incorporate, or why is it that this may not have ever been incorporated, and the role of knowledge systems in sort of steering ahead these discourses, such relevant discourses. So as Dr. James very beautifully introduced, Anthropocene is a proposed geological epoch. It's an era. And its scientists claim, especially this term was popularized by Paul Crutzen, who considered that because of the influence of human behavior on the Earth's atmosphere through many centuries, a certain geological epoch has begun, which is where we are in currently, that is Anthropocene. But politically, this nomenclature or this name, this idea signifies something else. And this was also brought out very beautifully by very extensively by Professor Bakshi, Upendra Bakshi, in his talk, where he states that the International Stratigraphic Commission claims that the age of Holocene, which was before this, ended, which lasted about 12,000 years ago, finished, and we have now entered into this human age called Anthropocene. And there is a sufficient degree of threat. There is enough evidence to suggest how harmful can it be, how harmful an era can it be. So it is essential to sort of look at the whole thing politically, and what significance does it carry politically is a very important question to one must ask. So that is something which he did present in as part of his talk. And Anthropocene therefore suggests an era or an epoch, as you call it, yugam. Okay, so where politically speaking, we have to rethink how we place nature in our discourses. So the way we place nature, so it's going to get a little conceptual, and probably I'll be substantiating what I'm trying to present here through some examples, which requires a lot of research. The research that I did in this field was on when you apply Anthropocene in the study of history of Western political thought, for instance, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Rousseau, all these thinkers, how do we make sense of the political? Okay, did they ever, in any of what they said, included the Anthropocenic concerns ever? Were they able to? That was a research which I did. I'm not going to present that. I'll be talking in general about how can we look at what political meaning does Anthropocene carry. So politically speaking, Anthropocene is an era which forces us to rethink on how we place nature in our discourses. The way we place nature in our discourses is such that it totally renders humans as the most dangerous for humans. Humans have turned the most dangerous for humans. In short, that is what Anthropocene talks about, an era where humans are dangerous to humans. So we hear a lot of discourse on climate change, especially nowadays happening. And this has been going on since a while, which does tell us significantly the importance of changing and probably mending our ways to a more sustainable present and a future. But the question really here is, which Anthropocene sort of opens our eyes to, is whose present and whose future? So whose sustainability are we talking about here? Whose sustainability do we often talk about? We might claim we are talking about everybody's sustainable futures, but to what extent is it everybody's, and who is this everyone? Is that again another disguise of human-centric discourse? Or do we really adequately place nature as an important entity yet? So why is it that when the availability of resources have somewhat diminished for us, we suddenly talk about climate change and we host conferences and summits to discuss it in detail? So you have states representing in international fora talking about climate change today. Nature was certainly not the primary concern till now, but to what extent is it featuring even as a concern is the question that Anthropocene asks. Even now, are we still featuring nature as an important primary concern or looking at nature as an important entity as part of political discourses? Therefore, it becomes necessary to get deeper into these narratives we are building today, such as sustainable development, climate change, and also necessary to discuss the causes and the impending challenges to it, which Anthropocene sort of opens our eyes to. So the nature has been usually conceptualized as the given, okay, and the known, as if it only comprises of and characterizes what we think of it as. So we attribute values to nature. That's what technically it's called anthropomorphic. So we associate values to nature. So when we come across people saying nature is angry, nature is showing its wrath, nature is showing taking revenge on us through the pandemic, through the lockdown. It's nature's wrath that is being manifested to us at this point. So here, even when we engage in such discourses, of course, it's because of human intervention. But even when we engage in such discourses, we sort of attach values to nature, as if the essence of nature is known, and we think of it as something that we know. And now, even in sustainable development talks, this is the assumption which is underlying in these talks, that we know that this is what we've done, so let us do something so that we repair it, as if we also know nature. Do we really give enough importance to nature as a political entity even in these discourses? I'm not sure. So that is what Anthropocene, the Anthropocenic lens sort of forces us to ask. So we talk of nature as if it is known to us and as if it can be known. Though natural sciences claim to know by establishing definitive meanings to it through the process of discovery, findings, which in turn legitimizes its position in the world of knowledge systems. That's what science talks. That's the method science approaches. However, the one who really do science cannot claim to know what leads to these phenomena, and it's happening. Its becoming is characterized by the known as well as the unknown. So there are a lot of known factors, and science sort of tries to claim legitimacy because it is able to discover and claim that this is what is known. But then there are probably an equal degree of what is unknown, and the reasons of which are never going to be revealed unless we engage with it and tread on to questioning it. There is never a known phenomenon as it manifests itself, because it manifests itself differently in different contexts. So you can never claim, okay, this is how the pandemic is going to be 20 years later. In every context, it's going to manifest itself differently. It's a known unknown. And that's a very famous phrase given by Nazim Taleb in his work, The Black Swan. It's an interesting text. So in every context, it appears as the known unknown. Of course, Nazim Taleb talks about something else, but this was another reference which I got from Upendra Bakshi in his talk, where he beautifully brings in that phrase to explain this is how we are dealing with. This is actually what we are dealing with, the known unknown aspects of nature. So we cannot claim, or nor science can claim, neither social sciences can claim, okay, we have known, or this is what it is, or this is how we can deal with it. Those are all definitive, deterministic ways of dealing with nature, where we are not providing any agency to nature. And what is agency? Agency is something which has a voice of its own. So we conveniently sort of assume that nature doesn't have a voice whenever we need. So we sort of attach meanings to it, and then place our dialogues, our policies, our laws on these meanings that we have attached to it. So we know what it is and why it is, but we still don't entirely know what it is and why it is. Extinction 2020, a documentary, so beautifully represents this phenomena, where one event which is a part of cultural practice or social engagement may affect the larger balance in the ecosystem, which is not directly visible to us. So if I decided, I don't recollect exactly what happened in the documentary at this point, but this was where some cultural practice which a certain tribe in a certain region did affected the ecosystem in some way, that the population of the stingray fishes drastically declined, because of which the food chain sort of got affected in the seas. And when people sort of became aware of that, because at some point when they required resources, that is when it became, it sort of appeared that, oh, it probably is because we did this ritual, or we did this practice, so maybe we can mend it. And that's how they atone for their sins, and they do an atonement by sort of changing their cultural practice, and that's how even culture changes, so perhaps we wait for things to get visible to us, and this documentary beautifully presents that. So, and when it gets visible to us, that when we now know that there's a problem, when it affects our economy first, or our political and social power relationships, we decide to talk about sustainable development and climate change. And this also shows the larger tendency of humans to sort of put everything else around the unknown and unknowable only in terms of language of the human. We use our language even for talking, even while we talk about nature. So we want to attribute characteristic features to nature because it affects us now. We want to attach names to it and perhaps consider events happening around us by giving centrality only to human narratives. So I am now interested to know more about mangoes, for instance, because it provides nutrients to my necessary for my body, or probably it is very tasty, so I am interested to know. And we are eternally in a position where we consume from nature, and as naturally it is necessary being a part of the ecosystem. So that's why you have examples like when I was a kid growing up, we used to have projects where we used to write extensively about the characteristic features of fruits. But so mangoes give us vitamin C. It's still about what it gives us, and it's still there is still a centrality of human narratives. I'm not saying it's wrong or we should not do it, but I'm saying we do it so routinely that it has sort of become part of our language, and we sort of look at it as a given, as if nature is supposed to be used or consumed by us. So and we consume with a sense of without any reciprocity, like we don't need to reciprocate anything, and that's when it becomes a problem. And this is precisely what Anthropocene talks about, and this essentially also became legitimate. Why should we look at it critically? Again, because knowledge systems contributed immensely to the normalization of this narrative. this narrative sort of became so normal that we don't think of it as violent at all. So when I listened to sort of this talk by Professor Bakshi, I was wondering how violent are we as far as looking at nature is concerned. Even when it comes to consuming, or even if we are responsibly consuming, we are still not aware of the extent to which we could be causing a harm, and at least that awareness is something that is lacking. So we consume from nature as if naturally we are supposed to do so, without any sense of reciprocity. So this essentially became legitimate again with scientific interventions, especially from scientists like Newton. And this was brought out by philosopher Professor Akil Bilgrami in his wonderful work on Anthropocene, where he talks about that nature. Newton, in his book Optics, calls nature stupid, brute, and material because God isn't in nature. In fact, it necessarily kept away. It was this engagement or this discourse on nature completely sort of questioned or kept away religious and cultural engagements with the advent of science. And this is what science did, which religion and cultural engagements, at least through their practices, especially pagan practices, at least they were worshipping nature in many forms, like Bhumi Pujan, or worshipping of rivers, or worshipping of air. In some way, you could see through rituals a certain sense of reciprocity, which again, with the advent of science, sort of gets questioned. And here in this whole discourse, nature is something which is getting sidelined. So the nature is perceived in myriad ways, but is deemed not necessary to be subjected to any political intervention. And through science, with its legitimacy and with its discoveries, it's sort of, I'm actually being critical of science. I'm not stating that science is bad or social sciences is great. I'll be also going to be critical of how political studies, which I'm a part of, or which I have been a part of, has also not adequately been talking about nature ever, even though we claim sort of at some point. So I'm not even sure whether we claim actually. So the nature is perceived in multiple ways, but one thing that is common in all of these discourses is that it is kept out of political intervention. In fact, it is necessarily kept away from religious, cultural engagements also with the advent of science, because it's considered sort of stupid to do this. In fact, you'll find in very interesting practices, such as performers, classical dance performers like Bharatanatyam performers would take the take the permission from the ground before beginning their program. That's a very small example, a little example of how you are you're reciprocating back to the earth for sort of using the earth as a stage, which now through science, because of science, it sort of looks very absurd to do so. So this is the problem that science has brought with it. Because these discourses are very powerful, which is why I have to talk about these discourses and cannot just blame it on people for sort of being unaware. When the knowledge systems can be so political. So, and even because of religion and cultural practices, at least we had harvest festivals, worship of animals, birds, even viruses, and the like. These practices in some ways did allow nature to become a part of discourse. Not sure how, but at least it was incorporated, which sort of completely goes to the sideline with other discourses, both sciences as well as social sciences. So now, what do you understand by politics? What is a place that nature holds in the political discourses? That's what I'm going to talk about. So the relationship between the self and the other is what signifies politics. Self is the dominant, the one that is dominant, and the other is the entity that is dominated. So there has to be the relationship between the two, the conflict between the two, the conflict between the self and the other is what you understand as politics. And the political is that space which identifies with this politics-centered understanding. So anything that constitutes the self and the other with a relationship between the two becomes part of the space of the political. Okay. So now this politics-centered understanding of the political was brought out by thinkers like Carl Schmitt and many of them, Chantal Mouffe and all of them, who wrote about the return of the political, where political should be central to our discourses to understand all events that happen around us. So therefore, it is important to sort of talk about politics while talking about nature, because it is supposedly claiming to be talking about everything that affects us. But is the political really incorporating nature within its fold or not, is the question that one can ask if we look at Anthropocene politically. So through the Anthropocenic lens, one can ask this question, raise this question. Interestingly, none of these, in any which manner, we do not even closely attempt to mention our relationship with nature. That's what many philosophers and thinkers like Professor Bilgrami, Professor Upendra Bakshi, and the likes have claimed that in none of these political discourses have we brought in nature, as if nature is just conveniently absent from our discourses, and we launch it only when we think it is not sustaining us properly. So a quick thought here. Do you think then that talking about sustainable development is going to be enough, when even in our very basic political discourses, we do not think or place nature anywhere as an agent with voice? It is neither taught in political studies, and I'm not sure which discipline of social sciences involves nature as it's part of its basic disciplinary framework, unless we go interdisciplinary. So Anthropocene helps us delve into these deeper issues and concerns related with our very existence itself. It pushes one into an abyss of deep critical thinking, because it involves everyone's lives and future unpredictable events which will affect every entity in the universe in different ways. It is therefore an extremely significant narrative so far as introspecting on our ideas of the political is concerned. So following are some of the points. It does help us rethink our notions of the political. Have we been actually political in our discourses? So following are some of the points that I would like to highlight as some key areas or some key points of the talk, which actually paints a little bleak picture of how knowledge systems work, and what they do to our conception of the world, and how we become active agents of this silently. And the language we employ to talk about it, especially when I perceive it as something that is external to me, that is, nature is considered as something that's external to me. So when I use a language to talk about it, I'm not exploring any other languages. I'm using my own language to attach meanings to it. So because of this, and we consider this as rational. So agriculture therefore becomes agribusiness, because now it has to provide me both nutritional value as well as a means to live by, as well as a means to sustain. And I'm now going to look at environment as a resource, probably. And over a period of time, that is what is going to determine my rationality. That's why that is what will lead to conceptions of welfare state, development, justice, etc. And this is how I'll form discourses without sort of bringing in nature as an agent. And this is what probably we have been doing. And so we look at it as an essential attribute of the product that we are dealing with, be it mangoes or be it coconuts, etc. So we, with our rationality, judge nature and attach moral values to it. To make it fancier, disciplines make it even more concrete. And they puts it in, you have various spectrums, different spectrums, the left, right, center, etc. And you have newer terminologies today. Every spectrum sort of deals with, maybe or may not be dealing with it. So we shall see to what extent. I'm not going to get into the details of how each spectrum or each ideology idea deals with the question that Anthropocene is raising, but I'll just maybe present a very generic picture. So yeah. So did we ever think of nature while trying to find out what constitutes the I and the we in political discourses? The I is sometimes an individual, or a society, or a community, or a state, or culture, or religion, or market. Where does nature feature in any of these understandings of being a political agent? Is nature an agent in the discourses? Does nature have voice? Uh, the second, the modern men, by this question, does nature have a voice? I do not mean to say voice in, literally. It means when we deal with nature, do we are we open to the fact that we do not know? Or even when we say we do not know many things about nature, we are actually attaching values to nature. We may not be putting nature at an equal position or as an active agent in our discourses. That's second. The modern men are well equipped with accessories, gadgets, technology for warfare, nuclear and conventional. Then they are creators of artificial intelligence, bulldozers, dynamites, bombs, mobile phones, digital accessories. That does not only disrupt nature but also itself. So we are living in such an era where, to the extent that Alfred Nobel had to lamented when he discovered the, or when he made the bomb, and he goes on to sort of lament this creation, and you have the Nobel Prize, the Peace Prize is named after him. So we create things which we know will destroy us. So there is a certain sense of thought given behind this. It's not ignorance always. So it's a carefully thought out thoughtlessness, if I may use that phrase. The third, and these are the things that Anthropocene projects to us, opens our eyes to. The third point, I'm reminded of this movie, actually, Manji. I'm not sure many of you must have seen it. It's The Mountain Man, Manji, the Mountain Man, where you had Nawazuddin Siddiqui playing the lead role in it. The brief storyline of this is that there was this huge mountain, and there were no roads. So the women of the families had to cross the mountains and get water. So in one such journey, the wife of this man dies, and he gets really, really angry at the mountain, and he decides to break the mountain single-handedly. And he does it for sort of, say, 20 plus years. He goes on to break the mountain into pieces. And he says, this is my revenge. I'm going to take revenge on this mountain for taking away the life of my beloved. Now here in Manji, he did not bring dynamites to blow up the mountain. He did not bring bulldozers to sort of ravage the entire space. He was definitely angry, but he did not intend on ravaging it. He did not want to intervene with nature through that kind of violence where you're blowing up the entire space. So he begins by acknowledging, the movie begins with he acknowledging that nature is his enemy. This mountain is my enemy. That means the nature is positioned as the other. He is the self. He wants to become the self now. He's going to overpower the mountain and claim himself as powerful. And that is his way of taking revenge. So the friend enemy dynamics continues for a while. And he comes with his tools every day. He breaks the mountain for 20 plus years, tries to build a pavement so that no other woman suffers this fate. And he doesn't receive any support for this. He does it single-handedly over a period of time. And perhaps this is what it means to collaborate with nature. Perhaps this is what it means to recognize and identify the agency of nature. So a human life is definitely dear, but does that mean you're going to bring in bulldozers and ravage the entire place and create roads, or completely eliminate mountains and build roads and claim that as development? No, he doesn't do that. He could have blown up the entire place like we do today. So we cut trees. We have the government's ordering to cut trees. You have so that government buildings and heritage buildings look very good. And this is actually based on a true story. And so I can't reveal a lot of details on this, but you have the absence of, in such engagements, the human manages to take revenge. In this particular movie, especially, the human manages to take revenge by being responsible, with the understanding that even nature has got an agency, in which both man and nature seem to be engaging in a dialogue with each other, and doesn't look at nature as something that has to go, or doesn't look at the mountain as something that has to completely go invisible. Perhaps this is what an engagement, this is what a dialogue means, um, where you give importance to nature, or where you try and understand the language of nature. The fourth point, the environment, you have many acts, laws. The Environmental Protection Act includes air, water, land, and interrelationship which exists between and amongst water, air, people, etc. And this is the basis of this law. Defines is a definition for environmental protection. Does practice concerning environmental protection ensure the threat today and all possible future threats? Perhaps in that word interrelationship there is a certain degree of openness, but what we do in political discourses especially is that we go with a different understanding of subject and object as two different entities, and where there is people on one side and there are inanimate things on the other. That is where the problem lies. Probably Anthropocene exposes this as a problem and says that nature cannot be looked at as, in definitive terms or mechanistic terms. The law should not therefore look at it as something that's external to it. It has to, not organically, but it has to processually, it has to become, both of these should be involved in a certain process where there is a constant interaction going on, and that is how one can work out understandings of welfare, justice, development, etc. So that is the function of a law according to Anthropocene. But are we having such laws which caters to this? So to what extent do our policies and daily conversations reflect that? Law preserves some aspects of our past experiences and our memories and tries to concretize it and attach values to it, and assumes that it is going to be enough for future generations. So is that enough? Is that enough to deal with this issue, this understanding of nature and human? So we probably should stop distinguishing the two and looking at it as subject and object, and then attach values and meanings. That is something probably that nature doesn't. The next point, even when we talk about natural law, actually, natural law again is a term which we have associated with humans. So we humans are associating with nature. This mentality is a given, and it's a natural part of our vocabulary. So most of these thinkers you'll find in political discourses talking about natural rights, natural law. To make it worse, with capitalism, neoliberalism, capitalism sort of got extended to the social spaces, and it was made very normal and acceptable to the masses, to the point that every human affair could be explained in market terms. Okay, so everything that we do, experience, live by has to be explainable in market terms, and that sort of became a routine. And this is one of this placed a bigger ethical challenge to human race, and this was brought about by a very interesting article written by Manas Ray titled "The Ecological is Political," where ecology is never brought into the political discourses, and because capitalism sort of became so widespread that everything was market centric. So there is this lack which is very much visible, which Anthropocene sort of tries to bring about. And it's not just capitalism, mind you, it is also it's also other isms. I may not be describing in detail, but because I talked about capitalism, I would also like to talk a little bit about how Marxist discourses sort of talk about this, or does it even talk about it? So Marx, for instance, begins with the premise that mind has to establish a relationship with nature, because that is the me and the material, because the nature is unjust, because the matter is unjust. So the existing material conditions are unjust. And it is this sense of injustice drawn from the external that will now steer my revolutionary consciousness. I am I will engage in a revolution. I, as the human, will engage in a revolution because this external matter or nature is unjust, and it is unjust to me. So it may sort of deal with the problem of economic injustices, but this justice is defined, conceptualized, and made concrete by humans, for humans, and it is of humans invariably. There is no role that the nature has in this discourse either. So all entities are equal, but some entities are more equal than the other. Man retains that position at the center, even in Marx's understanding of economic justice, which revolves around the economy, right? So, and develops a critique against capitalism, but still, while doing so, where is the presence of nature? And I couldn't have not brought George Orwell here, who not only places a critique of Marxism, but also uh, talks about the Russian Revolution, disintegration of Soviet Union through animals in his book, The Animal Farm. Very interestingly, he decided to bring in animals. And that's a very interesting talk. And when animals talk about revolution and change, they consider humans as enemies and the source of all evils. Whereas when humans talk about change, they do not even consider nature as the enemy. So nature doesn't even get the position of the other in the political discourse. It is just cubicled into some space and kept away from our eyes. So there is a certain some wall that is created, which we are blind to, which we are blinded by, that we do not even want to place nature as an enemy in our discourses. Whereas animals at least consider humans as their enemies, and that is one thing which I wanted to bring in. So, and you also have you have all different kinds of strands talking about different types of injustices, different kinds of injustices, but anywhere does nature prevail, or does nature become a part of any of these discourses, is again the recurrent question. So we may be the hollow men according to T.S. Eliot, but we are also the normal men according to the normal men is a phrase by Fyodor Dostoevsky. We are the norm, and the norm sustains us. So is leading a successful life the norm? Then that is what eventually sustains us. Ramin Jahanbegloo is a very interesting scholar who brought, through his book The Courage to Exist, he published this book during the pandemic. He beautifully writes that, I quote, "Civilization, especially the modern one, is built on the illusion that we must, at all costs, be successful. If we miss out completely on, even if we miss out completely on the meaning of life, we must be successful at any cost." Is it a quest for happiness or an experience of suffering? And this suffering prolongs because of the lack of experience of happiness. So happiness seeking has become a certain norm. That also is something that sustains us to the point that we may not be even in a position to question it. And then we build ideas, values, discourses, and narratives around this, where specifically nature doesn't even feature as an enemy. If nature doesn't even get the position of the other, how do we engage with it? So a certain norm gets established, it gets appreciated, it gets applauded, it gets projected as the best by institutions of power, especially knowledge systems. That's why you have grades in knowledge systems. So this is a better degree, followed by this, followed by that. And why am I coming back to knowledge systems is because I have raised that question as to how we look at Anthropocene politically. So, and Fyodor Dostoevsky was a scholar who sort of differentiated people into two kinds: the acutely overconscious man and the normal man. The normal man does not suffer from anything, does not suffer any lack. The overconscious man is considered to be the diseased man. Who and there is, and we are the normal men as far as Anthropocene is concerned. We all are normal actually. We talk about issues when it affects us. That is the definition of lack that we have. But actual lack is when it also goes beyond us. So it sort of, Anthropocene sort of raises ethical concerns and moral concerns to our face. So the deceased man is the one who is uncomfortable and who would at least try and wish to see eye to eye with nature. And the thing is, perhaps when we look at ourselves from an anthropocenic lens, we are all the normal men who do not even wish to see eye to eye with nature. And sadly, and as rightly pointed out, even though there are people who do so, I'm not generalizing all of us. I was talking about me mostly, but even if there are people who wish to look at nature, so the Manji, the mountain man, was looked down upon. He was called names, like he was called being stupid, he was called he was called as someone who was wasting his life. So if anyone talks about tribal displacement, if anyone talks about the restoration of biodiversity or the conservation of biodiversity, the conservation of genetically diverse products, genetically diverse crops, probably it may attract negative attention. And why is it that it attracts negative attention? Even from institutional structures such as governments and different governments, and even the state in general, because the norm is threatened. In such cases, there is no way nature can be brought into the conception of the political, because it totally shall unsettle the norm that celebrates the normal man and the happy, contented man with a stable order and lifestyle. So this is a systemic issue. This is a systemic problem where institutions of power are involved. And that's why lawmaking, law enforcing agencies, policymakers, and institutions in power such as the state must need to radically transform itself, especially given the nature of its own kind. And these entities must internalize the complexity involved here while dealing with nature. And where is nature located? Not even as the other. So we have conceptualized all kinds of relations with the eye. And it appears as if it's a consciously thought out activity done by different people, like be it Adam Smith or Karl Marx or any liberal thinker, etc. But and this human-centric discourse invariably continues. We tend to humanize nature. So, for instance, if I had to give you examples, formation of statues in places which requires radical deforestation or radical displacement of indigenous population by providing with adequate compensation. And what is this adequate is another concern. Disturbing biodiversity, threatening the balance, etc. are multiple examples that we see today. Also, we have narratives which talk about increasing or doubling the income of farmers through central and state governmental schemes, which also, but we do not see anyone talking about doubling the income of farmers, talking about charting the genetic diversity of various products. I'll give you an example. Like you have different varieties of mangoes, fruits, different other fruits too, so the concern may not be which fruits are grown. The concern again is how much income does it raise? So will the farmer be able to lead a profitable life? So just by doubling the income of the farmer, it will be okay to the purpose is solved. So where does the genetic diversity of different kinds of mangoes go, for instance? So according to a recent newspaper report in Navsari, Navsari is a place near Baroda. There is this taluka called Gandevi Taluka, where mangoes, there are various indigenous varieties of mangoes such as Sardar, Banraj, Malguba, etc., which are on the verge of extinction because farmers focus more on very popular varieties such as Kesar, Rajapuri, Alfonso, etc., because of its bumper production, because that is going to double their income and say sustain, so that farmers can sustain themselves. Another report on the Western Ghats of Maharashtra said why there is a gradual depletion in the visibility of indigenous varieties of mangoes, which was visible say 10-20 years ago, but now people have mostly forgotten its names too. So do policies and schemes mention genetic diversities of local varieties? Or do market pressures completely suppress the existence of these and many such varieties? Even the question of hygiene and the extent to which pesticides are used, for instance, and the damage that it causes to the soil, reducing water table, soil erosion, depletion of minerals, which will affect the plantation of varieties, are these raised? Because in one of the reports that I checked, you have production costs, the cost of production, the amount of you have the production cost as one of the agenda, the distribution, the background, and how much profit does it provide, which all regions are involved in this production, etc. But these concerns are not sort of brought in its understanding. And yeah, so environment nonetheless remains a site of ongoing contestations where nature ends up with very little value. And when looked at from the Anthropocenic lens, none of these ideas place nature within the ambit of political engagements. I'm repeating this point again and again. The nature versus nurture debate, when looked at from the Anthropocenic lens, is not a debate that incorporates nature. In fact, the ones who are with the nature side of the debate and the ones who are with the nurture side of the debate probably are together when looked at from the Anthropocenic lens. And on the other side, you have nature looking through the wall, because the nature is completely placed outside the wall that we have created. And when we talk about sustainable development, we sort of talk about those entities that come within the wall that we have created. So nature remains still outside this entire debate. The nature of nature is not even considered. So not getting considered even as the other becomes worse than being the other. And Anthropocene forces us to break this wall that we have created in academic spaces, as well as in real life, real world experiences, to conveniently not consider nature in its entirety as the epitome of values too. So what sustains through this conflict is nature that is sitting outside the wall and say exhibiting. I don't even actually have the language to define what nature is, and probably we should not define that. But we should try and work out ways in which we can collaborate with it and engage with it and incorporate our faults in the way we regulate our policies. I would like to conclude here. Thank you.
థ్యాంక్ యూ అపర్ణ విజయన్. సుమారుగా వారు 45 నిమిషాల సమయం పాటు అపర్ణ విజయన్ గారు భౌగోళిక యుగంలో సమకాలీన రాజకీయాలు ఒక పరిశీలన అటువంటి అంశం మీద నేచర్ అండ్ ఎకాలజీ పాలిటిక్స్ సంబంధించినటువంటి లోతైనటువంటి అధ్యయనం చేశారు. వారికి విశ్లేషించారు. వారికి తెలంగాణ జనవేదిక తరఫున ప్రత్యేకమైనటువంటి ధన్యవాదాలు. ఇప్పుడు ప్రస్తుతం మనము ప్రొఫెసర్ బుర్రా రమేష్ గారిని వారిని ఆహ్వానిస్తున్నాం. బుర్రా రమేష్ సార్, సార్ అన్మ్యూట్ యువర్ సెల్ఫ్ సార్.
Sir, namaste.
Sir, please, sir.
Thank you. I was fascinated to listen to. First of all, let me congratulate Aparna,
Thank you.
which is an emerging paradigm vis-a-vis how to look at the nature. So I appreciate being a scholar, speaking about so abstractly. The most of the talk is more of philosophical. Therefore, for that, being a teacher in education college, I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. But I have one fundamental question. Not fundamental. Why should I characterize my question? It is a question. The question is, who is going to speak on behalf of nature? Whether nature is capable of speaking itself, whether nature is capable of articulating itself, or again, we the human beings are going to speak on behalf of the nature. But there, I think there is a problem. Because the whole human history, oppressor, oppressed, even among humans, there are oppressors and oppressed. And you are extending this kind of dichotomy to humans and the nature. But having, it appears to be a little romantic idea, the whole ecological movement. Very positive, no doubt about it. We should be a little bit idealistic when we are looking at the nature. But the problem is, even if we want to consider nature not as an object, but as a subject, and it is we who are going to consider it as a subject, not the nature is going to consider itself as a subject. So how we resolve it? Because when people who work with the tribals or Dalits or oppressed or marginalized, they try to evoke agency that is present in them, right? But when we talk about nature, whether agency is present in the nature, so that certain individuals who are enlightened can raise that agency that is present within the nature. I think the agency potentially absent in the nature. Then this brings again a problem that it is we in the sense humans have to speak on behalf of the nature. So in that context, what kind of politics we need, how politics are going to speak on behalf of nature as if nature is becoming a subject.
Okay. So may I respond? Yeah. So, okay, that's a heavy question. And of course, that's a question which I also have been asking, but if only I knew the answer. But all I can respond is at this point that the problem with, it definitely appears romantic and philosophical because we never did it, nor did I actually. So when I was studying and when I would study about mangoes and look at it as a resource, I talk about how mangoes give us vitamin C. This is the nature of mangoes. These are the color of mangoes. I almost also looked at it as a resource, and we all use it too. Absolutely. But how responsible were we, or how responsible are we in its usage as a farmer or as a policymaker, as a lawmaker, who would want to associate meanings or attribute meanings to nature? And that's anthropomorphic tendencies are very huge. Even when we say that nature doesn't have an agency of its own, because probably nature is not talking back to us in the language which we know, we are again going with a certain assumption that nature cannot speak. My point here through Anthropocene is that let's stop looking at nature something that one can mechanistically and deterministically look at or use as an instrument. We'll have to stop using it as a means to certain end, like happiness or success I just mentioned as part of my talk. So when we do that, and when we create an entire civilization around it, we legitimize it, we normalize it, we make it part of discourses. So even political discourses, like in political studies, it begins with the state, and sort of it's so obsessed with the state that the idea of the political doesn't sort of move beyond it. Little do we realize that even when we place nature as the subject, if we had to place nature as the subject, I'm not sure which disciplines will remain alive today. But my point was, even if we place nature as the other, that is the beginning. Understand that nature is the other. You are sort of harming the nature, and you're not only harming the nature, you're also harming yourself. I mean, that again is a very utilitarian idea. Why did we have to wait for us to harm ourselves to realize that we are actually causing harm to nature? So there's a beautiful movie that has come out just recently. It's called Sherni. It's a Bollywood movie by Vidya Balan. She works as she's the forest officer. Her duty is to save the tiger from getting attacked and from stopping the tiger from attacking the normal populace. The reason probably why tiger is actually attacking, it's actually not attacking. She says in one of the portions that the tiger is hungry. Just like you are hungry, you get hungry at a certain point of time, the tiger is hungry. So why do we only look at the tiger as something that is a man-eater, rather than as man who can be equally capable of ruining the ecosystem for the tiger? So you had, because of different political parties and their fights, there were so many mines that were created, many forests were cut. So between one jungle and the other jungle, there are mines now. There are fertile lands which were completely ravaged and that were used for political campaigns. And so the tiger has to cross these lands in order to go to the other jungle. Now, when it crosses and when it comes across a human, it's going to eat because it's hungry. So humans, the popular narrative will look at the tiger as a man-eater, as the most important danger. But what we have committed for the tiger to be forced through this process is something which we conveniently neglect. So if political parties who were campaigning for their position there would have come and said, hey, you have to just learn to coexist with the environment there, which the tribals are ready to do that, which the forest department is trying its best to do. Not always, but here in this particular movie, it's shown that it is trying its best to do, but because of the political parties and their leaders and the charisma of the leaders, the entire issue has become politicized. People are, diverted from this understanding that they should coexist with the tiger populace. So illegal activities are done. Political parties support it. Many government officials also support it. So there is an entire political narrative where tiger is sort of looked at as a dangerous being. Nature in general is looked at as something that's dangerous now that it is killing humans. Until then, when mines were created, when laws and policies were made, when no amendments were made in the atrocious policies and environmental protection acts, that probably is not was never reformed then, none of us spoke about these problems. Only when tigers started attacking people. So there are burning holes. There are holes in the which provides water to jungles. For centuries, for so many years, probably these holes were dry, which is what forced animals to come out of the jungle into the spaces where people lived and take water. If the forest authorities would have, say, mended those holes, probably the animals wouldn't have come out. So are we adding on to conflict, or are we creating conflicts? Or while we have to deal with the problem, now that it has become a problem, it has become a threat to human life, while we are dealing with this problem, are we just associating terms to nature, saying that okay, now it is dangerous for us, it is dangerous for the tribal, so they should be displaced, they should be provided with adequate compensation, something else should come up there, and then we think of resorts, then we give it off to people, entities that are powerful. So this is how one activity leads to another, and therefore a radical change of mentality is very essential, and it may appear very philosophical and romantic because there is no direct influence until occupants of these, or until entities involved in this discourse agree that there is a lack in our current discourses, especially the political discourse. So we have to understand, and especially now is the time when uh, uh, we should be doing it more often than ever before, because even if we are utilitarian, let's be utilitarian, we are harming ourselves with the discourses that we are going on that are centuries old. So Anthropocene sort of wants us to break open these walls that we have created. And you may practice your ideology, but what will happen to your ideology or idea if nature is brought in, even as another? Subject is a far-fetched idea. I'm not sure how that will function, but even as another, if you bring in nature, how radically are you going to change yourself? That is the question. So it is definitely a romantic idea, but this is how I feel one could have avoided a lot of these conflicts. And this is what political discourses sort of do not want to engage in, and is considered as not contributing conceptually or theoretically or realistically to the definition of the political. It's conveniently ignored. And therefore, when you talk about what is the justification that you give for the tribal displacement, how is that going to regain the environmental biodiversity? How is that going to say restore? How is that even a definition of development actually? So all these are concerns, all these are questions that anthropology forces us to ask. So even when we say tribal movements are anti-development movements, we go with a fixed definition of what is development. Even then, we are not changing it. Maybe it could be looked at as alternative development movements, because we are also taught, the tribal populace is also talking about its own development. And this agency comes with an interaction. It is not something that you are essentially born with. So the agency of the tribal populace who is experiencing a lack out of an interaction with oneself as well as with the other. But when you do not interact with, how will you interact if nature is not even part of your other? So that has to be at least brought out, so that through this interactive process, we move beyond using nature as an instrument, nature instrumental. And that is, I guess, the idea that roughly I wanted to talk about. Sir, I don't know if I responded.
Yeah, okay. మీరు ఎక్కడ పోయింది సార్?
Okay, thank you, Aparna. A few more questions from Professor Ramreddy garu. Sir, Professor Ramreddy sir. Sir, unmute yourself, sir. Radapoyinda sir. ఉన్నాడు సార్ ఉన్నాడు.
కొడుతున్నా.
Yeah, unmute చేయండి.
Sir, please unmute yourself, sir.
మీరు అన్మ్యూట్ చేయలే.
చేసుకోకపోతే నేనేం చేయాలి?
స్వాతి మిశ్రా.
Good evening.
Swati Mishra, unmute yourself.
Yes, sir, I'm unmuted.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
There's one more question, Aparna. Rama Rohini Madam, after Swati, Rama Rohini Madam will talk. Yeah.
Hello, Aparna.
Hi.
Yeah,
Hello.
it was a good session, and I definitely support your view on ecological development. Nobody thinks from that perspective. And as to the previous question that was asked, it's not a romantic theory. It's a very good theory. You need to have two sets: human development versus ecological development. And it is at the intersection, at the junction, that we can find the overall development for the earth. Nature, we often confuse it for many things. Resources as commodities, whether to think in terms of the fauna and the flora. So when nature is not there to talk about itself. It will always be human centric. We need nature for the survival of humans. So when we talk about ecological development, it's about the individuals who research and who understand the nature and speak on their behalf. And it's not something rare today. There are so many institutions and individuals, volunteers coming up as the foresters or learning about the forest. So it's like more of, why can't we as an individual learn about our own nature and environment? And why can't we speak for themselves? But if we consider everything from the aspect of ecological development, where do humans stand today? From today, okay, so it's like we have come technologically forward, but if we stop thinking technologically, politically, or economically, and just focus on ecological development,
Okay.
Where do we go from here?
అప్పుడే అంటాం కూడా మీరు నా మ్యూట్ లో పెడితే
And then, as like, if we allow the nature to speak, it would be gruesome. Like, I lived in Forest Research Institute campus along with, like, it has its own reserve forest, and we live with the leopards. You allow the nature to speak, you have deaths caused by the leopards and the lions. You just have to let them loose, and it's a cry for survival. That's what happens if you allow the nature to speak. It always human who has to speak for both the humans and the nature. We have to understand our own environment. We cannot be someone be totally disassociated with. Like, why can't we learn about the birds that are there in your garden? One has to, but I also feel that one also has to think technologically and economically, because sustainability is not environment centric, it is human centric, because sustainability was is a very vague and ambiguous term. It actually means economical development without harming nature. It's not about nature, it's about the economic development that also sustains the nature. So, like, what would be your view? What would be the right development method for us to progress ahead? Where are we lacking in our plans, development plans?
Thank you,
Madam,
Swati.
madam, please, Aparna, madam, please. One more,
Yes.
one more question from Rama Rohini. Rama Rohini, madam.
Yeah. Hi,
Please.
Aparna.
Aparna,
Can you hear
one
me?
minute. Aparna, hold on, please.
Thank you, sir.
Can you hear me, Aparna?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
Yeah. Firstly, many congratulations for a very good presentation. And also, till now, I didn't realize that Maji had not destroyed the nature, because I had traveled to that place and I stood and have a photograph of that place where Maji built the road. And I must tell you, on all the mountains, you can see the chisel marks. And the road is just wide enough for one car to pass at one time. So that was the fantastic idea. And secondly, now my question. In the context of your talk, and also in the context of previous two questions, my question is, what when you talk of institution and agency, we have something called National Green Tribunal, okay, NGT. So is it how do you perceive its role? Because I perceive it's not like the kind of role it is expected. I am disappointed many times by its role. So how do you see how can NGT play a more active role towards our environmental policy, and so that we are more in harmony with the nature and with humanity? And in context of the previous two questions, do you really think it is the institution and the agency that can really take forward our policies forward, take development into consideration and all those things into consideration and make us live in harmony with the nature? That's my question. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Do I respond?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, madam, please.
Yeah. So, to respond to Swati's question, I mean, model of development, I mean, that's too huge a concern. At this point, it has to begin with, as you said, when we deal with these concerns, it has to be a part of our routine conversations. And it has to begin with that, then with, say, laws and policies, and then acts, and then maybe we can think of a certain model. And actually Anthropocene exposes the fallacy of talking about ecological versus human, or ecological versus economic, actually, development. Why is it that, yeah, economic development will definitely be human centric, but then why is it that it has to be essentially placed at loggerheads with ecological development? Why can't they both go together? That's an ethical concern. So the question here is not about which model one should incorporate in order to apply Anthropocene. I think it's more about your mentality. It's more about what questions you raise, how you raise them. And as you talked about, rightfully pointed out, how even sustainable development doesn't take into consideration nature as the central agency in the political discourse. Similarly, in unlike that, actually, Anthropocene wants different entities to become part of the discourse. Now, it is again not fixed. So when you talk about models, you again fixate it into categories. Anthropocene wants us to break open these categories and sort of go beyond these distinctions of ecological versus economic, human versus ecology, etc. Why don't we look at them as active participants of a dialogue or of a dialogical process, and then think of, so in our I gave the example of this policy of the income, doubling the income of farmers. If that is what your goal is, or if that is what the goal of the government is, and then you develop schemes in order to sustain that, do you incorporate genetic diverse products as part of that scheme? Does your scheme involve providing special immunities to those products which are very difficult to produce, or are you only looking at the final gross production? So basically, you're concerned about the GDP, or are you actually concerned about the quality of the products, or which products are in place? And even when we have to talk about quality, there are a lot of examples that has been raised, and that has become a problem crippling mankind for centuries, especially post the endosulfan tragedy in Kasargod, which crippled so many people's lives because of excessive use of pesticides and because of no lack of proper norms to regulate the use of these pesticides. And so how do we discuss these problems? How do we incorporate these questions? I don't have a model actually in place, but I just have these concerns. So be it any model that is in place, what is the role of nature? How do we look at nature? Ultimately, even while I'm talking about Anthropocene, probably I am at some point attaching values to nature. I'm not claiming I have the proper language to deal with this. I'm not even claiming that. I may also be attaching meanings to nature and values to nature. That is for us to reflect and say, constantly it's a reflective process. That is all I can say. And be it any scheme, let us look at it from an anthropocenic lens. Let us use it as a lens to look at who's the agent. What are the actors involved? Who are the actors involved? How do we place nature in this discourse? What are the consequences of the existing scheme? How has it harmed all entities, not just humans? Very important. How has it harmed humans? Another very important question. So we know pesticides harm humans, but we still continue. We have to, because of a lot of issues, economic concerns, bulk production, transportation, a lot of things. But which alternative methods can be used? Who are involved in that? How much funds do these organizations have? Do these schemes allow for such concerns, allow for such changes or such flexibilities over a period of time? How are these resistances taken? Is government open to these questions? Is government, or any government, be it any political party, are they open to these concerns? Do governmental scheme take into consideration these questions? These are some practical questions that we can ask while applying anthropocenic lens. So there's no model at this point, but yeah, this is how I would apply it. And I am not in a position to answer the second question, as I'm not very much aware of how NGT has played a role, but based on what little I've read, it has definitely there were proceedings that were made on stopping dam projects and all that. On that front, probably yes, it has, but not always. Again, I mean, it's too. At this point, one thing is for sure, that we do not have an institution which gives centrality to nature. Of course, there are many movements. Actually, civil society has been that active space which has led to the creation of these institutions, also these tribunals. Civil society is still a hopeful space, but again, as you know, civil society politics is another concern, because civil society also has to be legitimized by the state. So we have to constantly deal with this dilemma. Yes, I mean, I can't opine on whether NGT is doing a good job or not, but it has definitely. Uh, uh, but it has also like in some of the dam projects and um, uh, the actions that were taken were not adequate enough is what I would say. In
Thank
fact,
you,
it
Aparna.
is.
One more question from Sudhakar. Sudhakar. Mr. Sudhakar. No, no. Swati? Okay. Yeah, Swati, madam. Any
Yeah.
doubt, madam? Please.
Yes.
Swati.
Thank you,
Yeah, please.
Aparna. You have very well put the aspect of questioning and questions like, so this is what started in the 1970s, what we call the assessment of the entire system, the life system. So no wonder the questions are essential to develop a better model or the policies. And I definitely get where you come from. I'm an environmentalist and I place nature in the center as well. Like what you speak is the concept of like deep ecology, if I'm not wrong.
Ma'am, can you repeat, please?
The concept of deep ecology, where we put everyone at equal. Right. You have to respect everyone. Nobody is below the other.
Yeah.
You spoke of Gandevi. I live very close to Gandevi.
Okay.
What you point out is right. Like the farmers are going for just a fewer varieties that will bring them more money instead of protecting all the varieties, other varieties from going extinct. I don't know if you have visited Gandevi or not, but the region is economically distressed. It borders with the down region, and they have focused on ecological for so long. Okay, there are no major infrastructure, economic activities, but still the place today is no longer safer for its own species. It's not a safe habitat for the faunas. Okay. So there has to be something else. It's not just the economic or the infrastructural activities that is wrong, but there is something else that is causing this ecological distress as well.
Yeah, ma'am, please continue.
Yeah, okay. Now for this Gandevi, the place does not have any other economic boost other than farming. So farmers have to depend on the species that will gain them money. So I feel like you have to pay attention to a lot other aspects other than just because like Dang, as we see, they have focused so much on the ecological development, ecological nourishment, but still today the species are running away from that place. They're abandoning their own habitat. It is like one of the richest habitats in Gujarat, and yet species are abandoning it. So I feel it's like even sometimes when you focus entirely on it, it cannot help you save the nature. There are many other factors that needs to be considered. And like as you spoke of Manji, I haven't seen the movie, so might be wrong somewhere, but I think I know the gist of it. The man, he carves down the mountain so that it's easier for him to get that water. The thing is, he uses it again. Like he's carving it again for his own benefit. There is an environment of benefit.
Madam Swati, madam, thank you, madam, thank you. Dr. Puli Anil Kumar gar. Sir, Dr. Puli Anil gar.
Yeah, good evening to everyone. And I'm really appreciate the scholar Aparna Vijayan and her effort Doctor, I am also a Ayurvedic doctor. I done my PG last, I completed my PG in 2015. I saw the enthusiasm in yours when I was a scholar in 2015.
Sir, your voice is echoing, sir. I can't hear.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate your effort and your elaborately explanation, and without any obstruction, and your flow as a more philosophical and scientifical and explanation regarding the nature. And I like a very good statement what you explained that. Why? Because today we doesn't have a standards really to define the nature, the word nature, and the man is the enemy for the man. These things very what is it? Is very philosophical things which we have to understand very deeply. And really, I completed my post graduation MD as an Ayurvedic scholar in 2015. I saw the same enthusiasm in you when I am a scholar. When I raised so many things in the panel discussion, either government discussion, either scientific discussions, maybe I am wrong so many times. I argued myself that maybe I am wrong, but my idea is new. So your thought is showed me a new way to explain and understand nature in a different way as a scholar. So and as a Telangana Jana Vedika, we are trying to make you to understand the standard of this platform, the how scholars also sound here, to prepare yourself to next time to as what you prepared as much. Okay, and we are very congratulations to you, doctor, and thank you so much for your active participation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for these kind remarks. Thank you so much. If I may respond to Swati ma'am's question. Ma'am, thank you so much.
There's one more question. Let one more question.
All right.
Aparna, one more question is there. Let it. Sudhakar sir.
Sudhakar garu. Sudhakar garu.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, please.
Okay, I have joined the meeting in the middle. Just I have one question.
Yeah, please go ahead, sir. Please go ahead.
Yes. Already some experts are saying that Anthropocene has not yet started. But I am asking the Aparna Vijay, is Anthropocene has started?
Okay. Okay. Anthropocene, according to scholars, the scholars whom I refer to, especially refer to in the sense who have seminally contributed to politically looking at Anthropocene, like Professor Upendra Bakshi or Professor Akil Bilgrami, etc. They, according to them, we have already entered this phase because this is the age where humans, knowingly or unknowingly, or both together combined, are a threat to humans. So we have mobile phones. We know it is an inevitable accessory today, but we know its problems. And we have companies and institutions going ahead and creating its updates and updated versions of different of all of these devices. Then you also have artificial intelligence. Actually, Anthropocene is more of an applicative area, whereby I feel it can help us redefine our respective academic boundaries. And this anthropocenic discourse, when looked at politically, definitely helps us understand to what extent have we been dangerous to our fellow humans and ourselves. And I feel we are already doing that with the pandemic also, especially. That's a not that we never had the pandemics before, but a worldwide pandemic with where humans have been a concern for initiating such kinds of events. James Gleick, in fact, wrote in his book Chaos, where one event that we do has a repercussion in some other part of the world. And a pandemic actually projects one such major event at a very large scale, where humans have invariably become epicenters of injustice and violence to ourselves. And in many aspects, probably we may not have adequately introspected, uh, uh, especially being part of academics and especially being part of knowledge systems, which has the power to influence so many people, which has the power to influence the future generations. It's very essential that knowledge systems at least adapt this as a political discourse. And I feel, therefore, based on how it has been looked at politically, based on how it has been defined politically, I feel we already have entered the age of Anthropocene. And we have entered the age of anthropogenic harm. It is creating harm for all entities in different intensities. So,
Thank you, Aparna.
You
Ravi
can
Sagar.
answer Swati also. You can answer
Yes,
Swati
yes.
also.
Yes, Swati ma'am, thank you so much for that, for paying keen attention to what I had to say. And I'm sure you already know that I haven't done any extensive research in this area. It's me trying to incorporate this whole discourse and within the ambit of politics, and trying to figure out how politically can we address the questions Anthropocene is raising. So to that extent, when I gave Gandevi's example, I haven't been to that place, but I did read reports, newspaper articles and reports on the same. As you rightly pointed out, and as I hinted towards the end, there is a lack of economic importance given to that space. So technically speaking, economically, development wise, it is far away from what we consider as conventional standards of development. True. Why is it that we do not have schemes where these areas are quote unquote developed so that it can contribute towards creating ecologically diverse products, so that it doesn't lead to the disappearance of genetic varieties? So the blame, or the point here is not to blame the spaces. The point here is that, in fact, these newspaper reports were almost like it was a cry for help. It was like, please save these diverse indigenous varieties of mangoes that are going extinct, because something has to be done so that economic resources reach here, for them to collaborate with nature in such a way that humans are provided, also again human centric, but nonetheless humans are provided with diverse varieties of mangoes, and these varieties don't go extinct. So yes, there are many concerns. Actually, there is it can never be a generic, this is not a generic answer or anything. It doesn't talk about resolve. It talks about trying to question in such a way that we can deal with the multiplicity of concerns. And rightfully, whatever concerns you raised is something which probably the anthropocenic discourse do talk about. Why is it that we don't uh, uh, that's why I said, when I responded to the other Swati's question, I did say that we cannot choose between, okay, let's go with economic more than ecological. No, that's not the answer. Let's go with that model which is going to sustain the ecological and the economic balance in that respective area, for which we'll have to find out how far have the funds been diverted. We cannot choose models here. We cannot categorize ourselves, be it whatever my ideology is. I am not going to categorize myself into certain blocks just because I have to solve, and that will universalize all problems. As you rightly pointed out, it has to we cannot homogenize problems. That is why I began the paper with the known unknown. We are dealing with unknown factors, we do not know what we are actually dealing with. And yes, it will benefit us also. In fact, sadly, we are talking about it because it is harming us. So it's not that we are not selfish. I'm not saying we can stop being selfish at some point. Even when I'm saying probably I'm being selfish. And Manji man was also getting benefited by that, definitely. But he did not engage in a relationship with the mountain with the intention of overpowering and suppressing it. He wanted to collaborate with nature and work out something that is good for him, which initially was harmful. without destroying the natural elements, without destroying the minerals there, without destroying the ecosystem there. So there is a I think I forgot ma'am's name, but the ma'am who had visited the place, there is a small path whereby a car can go, which was enough for him. If today, if we look at the way we deal with nature, we bring in bulldozers and blow up the place. Is that an answer? That's the only question. So it's not that it's not going to benefit me. It may be benefiting me too, but in what way? It's not what we do is apart from what we do, how we do it and why we do it is also an important concern. So I think opens our eyes to that. And thank you, ma'am, for those remarks and for your
Thank
comments.
you, Aparna. Thank you. Last question from Yash. Yash, please unmute yourself. Ash.
Hello, Yash. You have written something in the chat box. You want to ask her or?
Okay, I can read it, I think. According to British scientist James Lovelock, we are witnessing the end of Anthropocene and the beginning of what he calls Novacene. That's true. Yeah. Okay, it's not a question. Yes.
It's an observation.
It's an observation. All right.
Venu Gatla, you want to ask anything?
Yeah, yes, sir. Just I surfaced my question.
Yeah, please.
If we can able to answer it. Is there any severe need to replace this economic phobia by any living standards which can envelop nature's order?
Okay. To raise living standards, which develops in Germany by replacing economic-centric lifestyle. As I said, I do not have a certain model, or I'm actually reading your question. 1 second. No, the question is not about being phobic to economic development, but about responsible economic development where nature is also part of the discourse. And to acknowledge that, or to begin by acknowledging that nature is not part of the discourse. And therefore, we have to incorporate. So if we are talking about Environmental Protection Act, to what extent is it involving our dynamicity, our dynamic interrelationship with other elements of nature? Do we talk about that? To what extent does religion play a role in doing this? To what extent should the state interfere in such religious practices, which also helps generate the sentiments in people on being thankful to nature? So when science comes and says, hey, religion is very irrational, that is not at all irrational. That is absolutely irrational. This is what is rational. You sort of legitimize knowledge also. And the response to that is not, okay, only talk about religion. Science is completely bad. We cannot pick sides at this point. We have to get them to engage in a discourse. And Anthropocene sort of transcends so many of these discourses that already exist on the grounds of caste, on the grounds of gender, be it on the grounds of all of these discourse of class. Anthropocene talks about nature too. Involve this as well in all the discourse that you are currently carrying out, and see what kind of schemes can come about, which initially requires one to not universalize the problem. It is highly contextual. It is highly based on the respective diverse needs, and whose needs is one fundamental question which you need to be constantly aware of in the back of your minds. So I'm not saying there shouldn't be profits or there should not be, but to what extent does a certain scheme engage with nature, and how does it engage with nature? And what are the possible consequences of the scheme? What are, not just economically, okay, because we are very much channelizing our discourses towards to what extent is it economically viable, but to what extent also ecologically, and maybe at some point there is no difference. The differences are blurred in an anthropocenic discourse. That's all that I can say at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. May I ask, now I ask Professor Lajwanti to give her comments. Professor Lajwanti.
Yeah, thank you, Ramarauji, and for giving me this opportunity to speak. I must congratulate Aparna, not because she's my colleague working alongside me in the department. I must congratulate her because honestly, in the classroom, I never nurtured this kind of an orientation. So what I went on to teach her was the same instrumental understanding of knowledge. And so I must congratulate her for this grasp over an idea which is yet to find ground in India. In fact, if you ask most departments in most universities in this country, they would still be unfamiliar with this whole problem of the Anthropocene. So the kind of grasp that Aparna has over this topic is, I think, absolutely commendable and excellent. I'm sure she must be wishing that her PhD topic was on Anthropocene, which it is not. But I think, and if I may, if I may just make 2 or 3 additional points to this. I think the first, what we need to look at, and I have, I'm fascinated by the questions which followed. I think what we need to look at is the way we look at things with instrumental rationality. So for instance, I'm holding this pencil. What is the use of this pencil? What do I get out of this pencil? What do I get? So when people come to me now, admissions have started. When we learn political science, what will we get? What will we, and there's this person, Pravesh Jangole in IIT Mumbai, he says, what will you get? You've already got political science. What more do you want? So we have this instrumental rationality to much of the way we look at the world, including and mainly the way we look at nature. So, nature is now not nature, it is natural resource. It has become a resource. So for instance, if this plot of land is not giving me, and for instance, I go to Dubai very often. Dubai was desert, but that nature was transformed into natural resource. And look at what it has happened to that place now. So it's not only nature. I think it's every relationship, everything which we acquire, we want to acquire, capital, everything. We look at it with this instrumental rationality. And Anthropocene, I think, is just getting us to rethink this instrumental relationship that we have with nature. The second thing which I want to, actually there's a lot which I want to say, but I'll just speak on 2. The second thing about this, understanding that this is very romantic, idealistic, I do see the point. It is romantic. But I'm sure when the French Revolution was happening, when the anti-colonial movement was happening, when homosexuals were pleading for and mobilizing for the abolition of Article 377, at this time, all these would have been idealistic and romantic. If they had stopped doing that on the grounds that this is all idealism and romance, we would not have got freedom, we would not have got democracy, and alternative sexualities would not have got decriminalized. So I think this is, I'm not being, but I think this is not a sufficient reason to stop engaging with an idea that it is romantic. It is not a sufficient reason that it is idealistic. I think what we lack in India today, and this is not me, this is social scientists saying this very loudly, that what we lack in India today is an idea of what we want to be. We are absolutely clueless. So till 1947, we knew we wanted to be free. But what do we want to be now? We are absolutely clueless. And I think therefore some idealism, some romance is always absolutely important, desirable. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And once again, congratulations, Aparna. That was brilliant. Thank you, Ramarauji.
Thank you. Yeah. James, you want to say anything?
No, I was just, no one could have paraphrased it any better actually, which, I think the point that I was struggling with was just mentioned that why do we hold knowledge systems as also instrumental but I see the point when you ask questions like which model or which approach or which idea, because we are impatient to see results. But how have we seen what we have seen until now? Is something which we need to rethink on, and probably Anthropocene wants us to do that. And then maybe at some point something concrete can come out of it. And again, even why should it always aim at it should be aimed at or hinged upon a utilitarian understanding of, or an instrumental understanding of a certain productive result. The process itself, the process is what Anthropocene focuses more on. And yes, so yeah, thank you.
Manoj Reddy garu.
Yeah, good evening, Ramana. Good evening, all. And firstly, my respects to my Guruji Purushottam Rao garu. And really, Anthropocene and contemporary politics really a vast subject really today. What Ramana chosen, and Aparna ji, you justified to that subject what Ramana chosen. And I want to quote Mahatma, father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi used to say that India live in villages, because he was a visionary and thinking all this Anthropocene and all that. He would have said that in those days itself, before independence, that India do live in villages because villages are much close to the nature. And if we go to the past, while we face that, this Nagasaki and Hiroshima, bombarded by the fleets of US, and we know how much the chemical reaction over there and all that. And my question to you, madam, is we were being shivered by this pandemic from past one and a half year, like one year. And what about this pandemic, madam? Is this a biowar or a politically thrown something like that? I want to get a clarification, madam, as a political scientist and as a student of Chetani ji. Please give us the correct answer. Thank you, Ramana. Thank you.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah. Please, Madam Aparna.
Why is it that a bio war is not a political war? I mean, what is the difference? That's the first response. And what is this? So if you have an understanding of what is correct, then maybe I'm so sure that I'm going to get myself wrong, because I'm not sure if there can be one correct answer to explain the pandemic or the cause. But what we can do is how it can force us to introspect on how we have led our lives, and how do we wish to conduct ourselves right now, and maybe in future. But then right now, how are we responding to this very event of pandemic? And yeah, so in that sense, it has forced us to engage with ourselves politically, and engage with a lot of what is going on in the system. It has exposed the fact that the system is so broken. It has which already probably was broken, but maybe in the pandemic it has become, it is known to us now. So we can't say, so when I'm completely against those who say that the pandemic is the bad guy here. So it's not the pandemic that's a bad guy. If you think the pandemic is what is causing all this, probably we need to rethink on how we conduct our lives, because pandemic is just exposing what we already were, and pandemic is exposing how prepared were we to the problems. And in fact, precisely Anthropocene talks about this lack of knowability. We are not sure what we are dealing with. We are not sure the consequences of it in the present as well as in future. And the pandemic is a very good example of that. So what best can we do is introspect and find out where we went wrong. How are we dealing with it, with ourselves? How are we dealing with our systems today? Right from the cause of pandemic or the way we are dealing with the pandemic through vaccination or through availability of resources, through administering resources to the right people at the right time, through ensuring good policy decisions so that the beneficiaries are receiving the resources at the right time. So be it anything, why is it that there was a crisis? Why? So public health sectors were sort of overburdened, because public health sectors, according to many economists as well as social scientists, are not private health sectors, according to them, are not capable of sort of dealing with a long-term epidemic disease. And therefore the burden falls entirely on the public health infrastructure. Where did the resources or the government funds go to? Why is it that how did the government respond to this? Be it allocation of funds, where are these funds? Where were these funds going before? What is the agenda of the government or those institutions in power? It invariably opens our discourse to the way religion is being looked at, the way caste is being looked at, the way ethnicities are being looked at, the way regions, states, the relationship between center and state, federal politics, everything needs to be relooked. And probably this pandemic is forcing us to relook and rework on all of these, or maybe work on these, on areas which we never have worked before. So I think this is what the pandemic has taught us. I mean, or the pandemic therefore cannot be, so you cannot blame the nature for doing this, or you cannot say, oh, pandemic is so bad, it's such a miserable time. We probably were miserable enough, which is getting exposed right now in the pandemic, and therefore it's necessary to relook. So I'm not sure how optimistic this discourse is, as was claimed by one of the participants, one of the attendees, but it deeply makes you remain critical of your own circumstances, I feel, and Anthropocene makes me do that.
Thank you, Aparna. Praveen Sagar.
Good evening to everyone. Good evening to Telangana Jana Vedika members from Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and across India. Now I have to say. So, I mean, it's a wonderful topic chosen by Ramanna and the core members of Telangana Jana Vedika. It's a definitely technically different subject. I think we normally will come across political kind of aspects discussing, nowadays. But when it comes to this topic, which has been explained by Aparna ji, is definitely a, we can learn something from it actually, I feel. So definitely, I have a small question to Aparna ji. The session is wonderful, and I have been listening to your answers to the questions asked by the members of Telangana Jana Vedika, and all the answers are like more than the question you have been giving. It's a very nice. My question is like straight to you, is like, so after independence, when it comes to India, I think we have been developing industrially very drastically. So when it comes to industrial development, we definitely need nature. The products which comes out from the nature. Example, coal. We use it for thermal energy, and in a similar way, we will use wood for some other ways actually. And like this, we have to destroy somewhere the nature. Directly or indirectly, it's a need for us. So the population now in India is like around 140 crores on record. So after 30 or 40 years, it would be more than 200 crores. So how are we be able to handle that situation? The earth space will be same as it is. It's not going to increase. The population will go on increasing. So how many years how we have to handle it actually? How is it practically possible? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your kind words, first of all, and thank you for the trust, for trusting me with such difficult questions actually. But quick response. So when we have been so utilitarian as far as defining industrial development or human development or economic development is concerned, that even human development and social development were all connected to industrial and economic. Okay, that is a given. and coal or all those resources were used, because but we are aware that they are non-renewable resources, so it leaves a certain footprint. Now, which is why you have discourses like let's switch to solar power. But even there, look at the irony of it. When we might claim that we are little more empathetic because solar energy is something which is abundantly available. So let us use something which is abundantly available as opposed to coal, which may not be so much available, which may cause a lot of harms. So let us switch from coal to solar. But when we do that, we still place ourselves. So probably one major response to you would be that we'll have to displace human from the centrality, from the central position in these discourses, even in our definition of development. That is the first thing. And even when we claim that solar energy is a far more it's because it's renewable, it's far more available, so that is a better way. You'll have to make sure that what are the harms that even this can create. So when reports say that, okay, I switched to solar, an entire city has switched to solar panels. But now, because there is unlimited electricity that I can create because of the solar energy, I'm going to use as many ACs as I can. All right. Am I not again adding on to am I not also leaving a footprint? Anyway, what I'm saying is, even if solar energy was good, we talk about how good is it for us. That has to change. So it's not necessary to that for our needs and necessities we require a $1 billion economy with industries. At some point, capitalism has to is actually getting threatened here. But and that is one quick response to whatever I said. You have to engage with the ecology, not engage with the ecology. Actually, ecology is also political. Environment or nature should also be part of this political discourse, which is not there. And even in this question and even in this response, I am only providing you with a human-centric answer. So we still are in these human-centric discourses, even those institutions which claim that they are talking about environment and nature. Where is the nature? I'm not even saying bring in nature-centric discourse. I'm saying bring in nature. While you bring in nature and engage with it, how far are you incorporating, how far are you being empathetic to these natural entities around you, instead of looking at you yourself as the dominant species? Even when I'm saying that I need to sustain myself, how can I compete with China, or how can I compete with other nations economically if I do not resort to industrial development? I'm only looking at myself. I'm only looking at the state and state domination. It's a state-centric discourse. It's an institutional government-centric discourse or a human-centric discourse. Nothing beyond that. Which is why even in political discourses, probably environment, ecological concerns are taught in the end. Because if we begin with it, the entire discourse on state, government, everything goes to trash can. So probably we'll have to just, I'm not saying quit human-centric discourses, because we have completely internalized it. But at least we can acknowledge that this is what we are only concerned with. We are so utilitarian that even when we switched from coal to solar, we were concerned with, we did not look at its consequences. We were only looking at how good is it causing us. So it's okay to abundantly use solar energy, but while you use it, you're also, how are you consuming this electricity? Are we questioning ourselves there? No, we are not. We are only looking at how beneficial it is going to be for us. How less electricity bills are we going to pay if we switch to solar energy? But are we looking at how are we going to use this solar power that we have created? Why don't we ask these questions too? So be industrially developed, but alongside that, why don't you also critically look at it? Why don't you also ask these questions? And that's what Anthropocene talks about.
Thank you, Aparnaji. Already 2.5 hours more session completed. So your lockdown period is completed. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, madam.
Swati, go ahead.
I have a question for you.
Yeah, for me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Like we speak academically and research wise, but you do lots of institutionalization work and ground level work. Where do you think is a basic drawback when we talk about environment?
So you need to unmute yourself. Ramagar.
You please ask your question, reframe your question, please. We ask.
Like we are here talking academically and research basis, but you on the other hand work with people on the ground level. Okay, and you do like lots of capacity building and institutionalization work. Where do you feel we go wrong when it comes about the environment?
Yeah, okay, nice. See, correct. When we are talking about agriculture, about 3 decades or 4 decades back, when I used to go at the ground level to agriculture farms or the villages, what I found was there were huge trees in the fields, which would give shade to the bullocks and to the farmers. But after the advent of the LPG, economic liberalization, governments have subsidized tractors, saying mechanization will help them. So by giving subsidies, and this is one of the faults I have found with the subsidies given by the government to the farmers. But unfortunately, what happened was the farmers, which we used to have, his land holding size is about 10 acres or 12 acres. And these huge trees used to cover about 3/4 acre or 1 acre probably. They fell all those, they axed all those trees, and there's no shade, and the bullocks are now being sold for cutting. So this is one of the reasons we have ecologically imbalanced the nature. That is one thing I have found, Swati, and a lot of things are there, but the moderator already is shouting at me. I think we have to give James a chance to close it. But anyway, Aparna, this was one of the very good sessions. It was a lively discussion, and as a research scholar, you have come up very well. It was really a lesson to all of us. I'm thankful to you, and thank you, Swati, for that question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Swati.
James.
Ram garu.
Sir.
What is the conclusion on this topic? I think the contemporary politics. What is the nature of contemporary politics?
No. I will send the link. No. I will send you the link, recorded link. You were not part of the meeting from the beginning. I will send the recorded link to you, please.
Can I think it is based on business development politics? Contemporary politics are market.
Absolutely. It is consumerism. It is nothing but consumerism.
Okay. Right. Okay, thank you.
It is based on consumerism now.
Yes. That means business-based politics. In Anthropocene period, the politics are business-based and marketing-based.
James.
Yeah. Shall I conclude?
Please. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Aparna, I really would like to congratulate you for delivering a wonderful session, which was it's a defining topic of these times, especially since very few people are talking about it, especially very few understand this topic. You helped us to understand the consequences of the changes in the biosphere, especially why comparing to the earlier eras and what has been happening in the past decades or the past century and a half, the amount of change that has happened in the biosphere that has prompted a discussion on this topic, and that has evoked, or that has that scientists have to bring in a definitive change in the geological ages, that and have to name this Anthropocene, and the causal agent for what has been happening. And of course, we have to understand, since we know the effects, because of when we compare to the biosphere of the thousands of years before and what has been happening in the last couple of hundreds of years, and the causal agent. And it is very clear. And thank you for explaining us all these pertinent issues to us. And that, of course, the causal agent is human. And we are again looking at human development versus ecological development. And we are placing human-centric issues at the core of all discussions. And this is where we are going into a catastrophe. And so thank you for explaining all these issues to us, Aparna. We are really thankful. We are very grateful to the very eloquent and very deep discussion that you have given us, and also to all the wonderful questions and all the answers. A good discussion that we had after this. Thank you so much, and we also look forward to hearing you again, and to have, because this is not a small topic, and we would love to hear more of this debate to continue at Telangana Jana Vedika. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Thank you, James. Thank you. Telangana Jana Vedika conclude yesterday. Vote of thanks. Telangana Jana Vedika Zoom online meeting కు ఇచ్చేసినటువంటి ప్రతి ఒక్కరికి, ముఖ్యంగా ఈనాటి కీనోట్ అడ్రస్ అపర్ణ విజయనంద్ గారికి, తర్వాత ప్రొఫెసర్ బుర్రా రమేష్ గారికి, ప్రొఫెసర్ లజ్వంతి చటాని గారికి, ప్రొఫెసర్ సంజయ్ రెడ్డి గారికి, ప్రొఫెసర్ రామ్ రెడ్డి గారు, ప్రొఫెసర్ సుధాకర్ అండ్ స్వాతి మిశ్రా, ప్రొఫెసర్ డాక్టర్ రామారవేణి, డాక్టర్ పులి అనిల్ కుమార్, ప్రవీణ్ సాగర్ గారు, యాష్ అండ్ వేణు గాట్ల, మనోజ్ రెడ్డి అండ్ ఇతర మిత్రులందరికీ, పాల్గొన్నటువంటి వారికి పేరు పేరున ధన్యవాదాలు తెలియజేసుకుంటూ ఈనాటి ఈ యొక్క సెషన్ ఇప్పటితో ముగిస్తున్నాం. వచ్చే సండే మరొక టాపిక్ తో కలుసుకుంటామని తెలియజేసుకుంటూ అందరికీ ధన్యవాదాలు, మరొక్కసారి ధన్యవాదాలు, నమస్కారాలు తెలియజేసుకుంటూ ముగిస్తున్నాం. థ్యాంక్ యూ. థ్యాంక్ యూ. Thank
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Really wonderful.
Thank you, Aparna ji.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I got to learn so much. I mean,
Thank you.
really, I don't know about anyone else, but
No. We look forward to listen more from you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ramu sir,
Yeah, Swati.
one of these days, can we have a session about Maulana Abul Kalam Azad?
Sorry, Swati, go ahead.
One of these days, can we have a session about Maulana Abul Kalam Azad and his educational policies?
We can. We'll have.
Okay.
I'll ask Professor Burra Ramesh if he can deliver a talk on that.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Yes. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good night.
Bye, Anna.
Bye.